In the early hours of October 1946, under the cold yellow lights of the execution chamber in Nuremberg, a high-ranking Nazi general stepped forward to face the court's sentence. He raised his head and declared in a clear voice, "I salute you, my eternal Germany." The execution was recorded as not proceeding as intended. The process took an unusually long time and remained controversial afterward. That man was Alfred Jodl. 6 years earlier, he sat in a command room, signing orders that led to serious violations of the laws of war. On June 22, 1941, under the direction of the German High Command, millions of soldiers crossed the German-Soviet border. It was the beginning of Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in history. Among the documents Jodl approved was the Commissar Order, which held that Soviet political commissars did not qualify as prisoners of war and excluded them from international protective regimes. It was a harsh directive that paved the way for grave violations of the laws of war. It blurred the line between combat and crime. Alfred Joseph Ferdinand Jodl was born on May 10, 1890, in the garrison town of Würzburg in Franconia, Germany. His father, also named Alfred Jodl, was a Bavarian artillery captain from a long line of officers with Tyrolean roots. His mother, Therese Baumgartler, came from a lower social class. Because of social conventions at the time, they could not marry formally. It was not until 1899, when his father retired, that they married. And the 9-year-old Alfred changed his surname from Baumgartler to Jodl. That name would later appear in newspapers around the world. It became tied to one of the most famous military trials of the 20th century. He grew up with his younger brother Ferdinand, who also pursued a military career and became a German general. Jodl's schooling followed his father's postings. He studied in Landau in der Pfalz, then Munich. There he began the Bavarian cadet program at age 13. The training was harsh: military drill, Latin, and frigid dormitories. On freezing winter mornings, the bugle sounded through the fog. That discipline shaped him into a meticulous cadet, accustomed to hardship from his teens. In 1910, at age 20, Jodl passed the Abitur, ranking among the top students. Soon after, he joined the 4th Field Artillery Regiment in Augsburg. At military schools in Munich, he strengthened the mathematical foundation needed for artillery. It underpinned the calculations and coordination tasks throughout his career. On October 28, 1912, at age 22, he was promoted to lieutenant, equivalent to second lieutenant, the first step forward in his army career. By then, Jodl was regarded as a promising young officer. In September 1913, Jodl married Irma Pauline Caroline, Countess von Bouillon. The marriage was childless, but strengthened his social standing. At soirees and in elegant salons, the image of a young officer from an ordinary family now moved in aristocratic circles. A few months later, in July 1914, World War I broke out, sending Jodl to the front. On August 20th, 1914, he took part in the Saarburg operation with his unit. 4 days later, he was wounded and left the front for treatment. This was the first milestone in his wartime service record. He was awarded the Iron Cross, 2nd class, in recognition of his service in the Bavarian Army. After recovering, he returned to the front in March 1915, taking on more responsible duties. In 1916, he was promoted to Oberleutnant, equivalent to first lieutenant, then transferred to the Eastern Front at the end of the year. In 1917, he commanded an artillery unit in the Royal Hungarian 72nd Field Artillery Regiment. The tempo of operations on the frozen plains of Eastern Europe became a familiar sound to him. Early in 1918, he was assigned to the Western Front as a staff officer. On May 3rd, he received the Iron Cross, 1st class, another important milestone in his service record. When World War I ended, Germany became a republic. The army was limited to 100,000 men under the Treaty of Versailles and became known as the Reichswehr. Jodl stayed in the army and continued to advance. He initially commanded an artillery unit. After outstanding performance in the Führergehilfen, command assistant courses, he was regarded as a potential planner, the kind of officer the new German army badly needed. In 1924, he was called to the Reichswehr ministry in Berlin. By 1928, he was teaching tactics and military history, passing on field experience to a new generation of officers. This marked a shift from field officer to strategist, a change that would shape his role in future wars. On February 1st, 1932, Jodl was promoted to major. On June 1st, he took charge of the operations planning section, a structure that effectively carried on staff functions restricted by the Treaty of Versailles. Jodl was not merely observing from a distance. He directly helped organize covert training programs under civilian cover, working with former general staff officers. He maintained a secret strategic nucleus. Skills courses were set up like sports clubs. Planning documents were stored in restricted locations, accessible only to a few. If discovered by Allied monitoring authorities, the entire network would have collapsed, and Jodl could have faced serious legal consequences. These plans, though prohibited, received tacit support from many segments of society. In the 1920s and early 1930s, Germany was mired in crisis. The economy was exhausted by massive war reparations. The mark depreciated to the point that people carried suitcases of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Millions of veterans roamed the streets unemployed, carrying bitter memories of defeat. National pride was deeply wounded. For Jodl and many others at the time, Adolf Hitler was seen through propaganda and promises as someone who could restore order and national self-respect. Even so, Jodl did not necessarily share or fully understand Hitler's contentious ideology. He placed his hopes in a strong central apparatus that could pull Germany out of crisis. When Adolf Hitler came to power in January 1933, these plans accelerated quickly. On June 20th, 1935, Jodl became head of the defense section in the Wehrmacht command office, a key post in the German military. It was a major turning point in his career. On August 1st, 1935, he was promoted to Oberst, equivalent to colonel. At the Berghof, the atmosphere differed from the military environment in Berlin. This was where Hitler met with his generals in a semi-formal setting. At times, meetings were paired with exchanges outside the conference room. It was in those seemingly ordinary moments that strategic ideas were formed, adjusted, and tacitly approved, thanks to his disciplined manner and clear delivery. Jodl was assigned to take part in key planning discussions. In February and March 1938, after the Blomberg-Fritsch crisis, Hitler removed several military leaders he considered unsuitable. The Wehrmacht command was reorganized. The Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, the Armed Forces High Command, was created, with many key positions filled by Nazi loyalists. The Wehrmacht Command Office, which Jodl now headed, became part of the OKW. He reported directly to General of Artillery Wilhelm Keitel. On August 23, 1939, 8 days before hostilities in Poland began, Hitler appointed Alfred Jodl chief of the operations staff of the Armed Forces High Command, OKW. The decision also made Jodl Keitel's operational deputy. Keitel had direct access to Hitler and could issue orders in his absence. From then on, Jodl stood at the center of planning for Poland, Weserübung, Norway, Denmark, and the campaigns in Western Europe. On September 1st, 1939, World War II began in Poland. The Polish campaign ended after 5 weeks. Jodl was involved in drafting the plan from the outset. In 1940, Jodl took part in planning Weserübung. Denmark accepted terms within hours. The campaign in Norway lasted about 2 months before control shifted. Norway suffered significant damage from air operations and the occupation. In the summer of 1940, the campaign in France ended quickly, within weeks. That result put Nazi Germany in a position of military advantage. Jodl was promoted to General der Artillerie by order of the High Command. After the victory in France, Jodl and his aides turned east. They drafted Directive Number 21, Operation Barbarossa. The document was issued on December 18, 1940. The plan bore Jodl's strategic imprint. The aim was a rapid blow, encirclements, and the paralysis of Soviet resistance within a few months. On June 6, 1941, Jodl helped draft the Commissar Order. It removed Soviet political commissars from prisoner of war status and allowed frontline units to deal with them on the spot. This order led to serious violations of the laws of war on the Eastern Front. Many cases were handled outside legal procedures, affecting both military personnel and civilians. In October 1942, Jodl signed the Commando Order. This directive allowed certain Allied Special Force in Europe and North Africa to be excluded from prisoner of war status and permitted them to be dealt with on the spot, even if they were in uniform or had laid down their arms. Those captured agents, commandos, paratroopers were handed over to the SS Security Service, Sicherheitsdienst, SD, for processing outside legal procedures. The result was numerous extrajudicial actions recorded across the fronts. This was a serious violation of international law. In the summer of 1942, during the Caucasus Campaign, Jodl noted that splitting forces and constantly changing objectives were hampering the operation. As the campaign bogged down, Jodl criticized this issue in an internal meeting. Hitler reacted sharply and quietly considered replacing Jodl with General Friedrich Paulus. The context was that Stalingrad later failed to meet its objective. However, in public, Jodl did not mention this dispute. He issued statements supporting Hitler's strategic vision. In a lecture in Munich on November 7, 1943, Jodl called Hitler a genius, quoted, and affirmed his belief in a final victory. He described it as a fight to the finish and argued that surrender would mean total collapse. In closed-door meetings around the same time, Jodl spoke of hopes for wonder weapons. These were secret projects believed capable of turning the tide. Although he understood the Allies' superior industrial power, he still expected a technical breakthrough that could salvage the situation. He was not a longtime party member. His party membership number was very late. Number 9,640,812. In 1943, Jodl supported deportation measures against the Jewish community in Denmark and rejected the proposal of the Wehrmacht commander there, General Hermann von Haneken. Haneken opposed exploiting the state of emergency. On Haneken's memorandum, Jodl wrote, "Nonsense. This is about matters of state necessity." That move legitimized a policy of repression and deportation. Some Danish Jews were arrested and sent to camps administered by the Nazis. Many families were separated. Harsh detention conditions led to high mortality. On January 30th, 1944, Jodl was promoted to General Oberst, Colonel General. However, less than 3 months later, his wife Irma died in Königsberg, while he was still in mourning on July 20th, 1944. A bomb planted by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg exploded at the Wolf's Lair, severely damaging the conference room. Sitting next to Hitler, he was slightly wounded. After the attack, he continued to approve directives for forced evacuations and the destruction of strategic infrastructure. He also authorized scorched earth measures in the final months of the war. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler died in his command bunker. In Berlin, the cause was recorded as suicide, marking the end of the Nazi regime. On May 7th, 1945, on Dönitz's orders, Alfred Jodl, on behalf of the OKW, signed the instrument of unconditional surrender at Reims, France. This event ended Germany's fighting in Europe. The document was signed in the presence of representatives of the Allied forces. The war came to a close, but its legacy was millions of victims. The Soviet Union feared a revival of the post-World War I stab-in-the-back myth. They demanded a second surrender ceremony at Berlin-Karlshorst on May 8, 1945. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel signed the second document in person, confirming Germany's total defeat. On May 23, 1945, Jodl was taken into Allied custody. He was then transferred to Nuremberg for detention pending trial. At the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, he was charged with 4 counts: conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Prosecutors presented evidence drawn from documents signed by Jodl himself. The evidence included the Commissar Order, June 6, 1941, which removed Soviet political commissars from prisoner of war status and allowed them to be dealt with on the spot, and the Commando Order, October 1942. These orders led to numerous extrajudicial actions. There were cases of on-the-spot measures against Soviet officers. Some Allied soldiers were handed over to the SD for processing outside judicial procedures. Jodl's annotations showed his support for repressive and deportation measures. For example, he rejected the Danish commander's proposal not to exploit the state of emergency to deport Jews. Some people were sent to camps administered by the Nazis. Harsh detention conditions led to high mortality. Jodl's own signature and handwritten notes became key evidence, demonstrating his role in the crimes. Jodl's defense argued that he was merely a soldier following orders and unaware of the camps run by the Nazis or of large-scale human rights violations. However, through questioning and the presentation of documents, the prosecution disproved that claim. Operational records and orders drafted or signed by Jodl showed that he not only carried out directives, but also helped plan invasions from Poland 1939 to Barbarossa 1941. These campaigns caused loss of life on a massive scale. His annotations on correspondence show that he rejected proposals to protect civilians, as in the case of the deportation of Jews in Denmark. The victims were of all ages. Many lost loved ones and property, and in the end did not survive. The Nuremberg trial of Jodl helped affirm the principle of individual responsibility for international crimes, a warning to the world. On October 16, 1946, Jodl's death sentence was carried out. In the Nuremberg prison gymnasium, where the execution area for 10 Nazi war criminals had been set up. The atmosphere in the gym was heavy, the yellow lights washing over the old walls. All formalities had been prepared as prescribed. Before the execution, he spoke his last words. Ich grüße dich, mein ewiges Deutschland. I salute you, my eternal Germany. This statement shows that he continued to express loyalty to Germany. Despite the court's judgments, though steeped in extreme politics, that pledge has haunted posterity. As a symbol of blind fanaticism, the execution was carried out by Sergeant John C. Woods. Witnesses noted the heavy atmosphere, and that procedures were followed. The execution did not proceed as intended, and was recorded as unusually prolonged. Those present remained silent. The recorded duration was about 18 minutes. A heavy mood hung over the room. It could be said that that final moment echoed the crimes of the entire system. Even so, the scale of suffering caused by the policies he helped implement, from large-scale crimes to the camp system run by the Nazis far exceeded his personal fate. When the room fell quiet again, the execution site remained there, cold and indifferent, as if nothing had happened. Jodl's request for execution, with military honors by firing squad, was denied, as was Keitel's. Goering died before the scheduled execution, officially recorded as suicide. The stated reason: the offenses were criminal in nature, not purely military. After the executions, Jodl's remains, together with those of the 9 other defendants and of Hermann Göring, recorded as having died by suicide before the execution, were taken to the Ostfriedhof Cemetery in Munich for cremation. The ashes were scattered into the Wensbach stream, a tributary of the Isar River, to prevent the creation of graves or sites of veneration. In this way, the Allies ensured that no commemorative sites for glorification would emerge. This was part of the Allies' post-war policy to prevent the cult of the Nazi legacy. You're watching Case X. Thank you for joining us as we reconstruct historical case files. If you found this valuable, you can follow so you don't miss the next analysis. See you in the next episode.